I'd like to separate out then the two issues raised by this will or this testamentary document. You're indicating that the portion of it that provides for the monies being distributed to the estates of the individuals is a foreign notion to you.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, could we please have a copy of the document
It's
which
Exhibit
counsel is
169.
referring to?
169.
Object to the term will. Mr. Chairman, I believe the term has been used 50 times in these hearings prior to today. This is not a will, and any lawyer in the room knows it's not a will.
It's the first time I've ever seen this document, ever.
Understood. You've said that. I just want to separate out the issues. There's a part of the document that provides for distribution to individuals' estates in the event of death. It's on the second page. And I take it your testimony is that that concept, not only have you not seen the document, but that concept is foreign to you. You never heard of anything like it?
I never heard of it before. I don't know how much more clearly I can put it, counsel. I never, ever heard that proposal before, that suggestion.
There's a second part of the document that relates simply to control over the use of the funds, and that's on the first page of it, second paragraph. And I take it that, although you never saw the document, the concept that you would control disposition of the funds, I don't mean in your personal capacity, but in your governmental capacity in the event of the death of Hakim and Secord, that's not foreign to you, is it?
Well, I never professed to have control over a single penny of this. I elicited the cooperation of General Secord. To my knowledge, he cooperated in every case with the things that we asked him to do. But I never once saw those words, nor do I want to leave you with the impression that this was what I had in mind when I said to them, what happens if both you guys drop dead? I was more than willing to have anybody else they wanted so that we could continue the activities. But I didn't necessarily wish to become the person who had to fly back and forth to Switzerland. I've never even been in a Swiss bank.
There's been testimony that several $1,000s was spent on a fence security system that was put in at your residence, and that the monies to pay for it came from General Secord. And my question to you is, were you aware, I take it there was a security system put in at your residence?
There is a security system in at my residence. It has since this April been sufficiently supplemented that it is now extraordinary.
And I take it were you aware that that security system was paid for by General Secord?
Well, I'm going to waffle an answer. I'm going to say yes and no, and if you'd indulge me, I will give you another one of my very straightforward but rather lengthy answers. The issue of the security system was first broached immediately after a threat on my life by Abu Nidal. Abu Nidal is, as I'm sure you on the intelligence committees know, the principal foremost assassin in the world today. He is a brutal murderer. When I was first alerted to that threat by the Federal Bureau of Investigation in late April, I was simply told that there was a threat that had been promulgated by Abu Bakr, who is the press spokesman for the Fatah Revolutionary Council, which is the name of the Abu Nidal group. He targeted me for assassination. We then made an effort over the course of several days to have the story killed and not run in U.S., not me, but the story, killed and not run on the U.S. media. Nonetheless, it ran, and I believe the date was the 28th of April. The initial assessment was that this was a response to the attack on Libya, which we had run a preemptive counterterrorist raid on Libya on the 14th of April, which I had a small role to play. CBS chose to run the film anyway. The FBI was then contacted again and asked what protection can be offered. The FBI correctly said, "We don't offer protection." I then sought other types of protection. I went to my superiors and said, "What can be done?" Contrary to what was said some days ago, this lieutenant colonel was not offered at that time any protection by the government of the United States, Senator Rudman. I asked for it, and I was told that the only thing that I could do is to immediately PCS, permanent change of station, you and I as Marines know well what that means, and jerked out of our home and sent to Camp Lejeune. In that I was preparing at the time to go to Tehran, and we didn't want to tell the whole world that, that was deemed not to be an appropriate thing to do. The next thing that we looked at trying to do was to find a secure telephone to put in my home to justify the installation of a U.S. government security system. That too was impossible, or not feasible, or couldn't be done. The next thing I did was to ask for a list of who installs these things for the U.S. government. Maybe I can get a better price by calling them. I believe it was someone in the Secret Service gave me a list of 3 or 4 of these companies that do that kind of installation. I called 2 or 3 of them. It is now late April, early May. It's within days of this threat. And I called and I asked, can you come out and do a survey and give me an estimate? And in each case, I think it was 2 or 3 of them, and I was at that point relatively busy, I was told it will be several weeks before we can come out and do an estimate and a survey, and it'll be several more weeks or months before we can complete the installation, because after all, summertime is our busy time. At some point along in there, either General Secord raised with me or I raised with him this threat, and I told him I couldn't get U.S. government protection, I couldn't find a contractor to come out and do it myself, and he said, don't worry about that. I've got a good friend or an associate, I don't remember the words, who's an expert. This guy has a company that does these things. And he shortly thereafter, I believe it was around the 5th of May, introduced me to Mr. Glenn Robinette. He was introduced to me as a man who, one, had been a former CIA, or perhaps I understood at the time FBI, I don't remember, technical expert, a man who owned a security company, and a man who could immediately go out and do a survey and an estimate. He did. Over the course of the next few days, he went out to my home. I called my wife or told my wife whatever that he'd be out. He went through the situation, and he came up with an estimate of $8,500 max. As I recall, it was $8,000 to $8,500, and he could furthermore immediately install the system. Now, I want you to know that I'd be more than willing, and if anybody else is watching overseas, and I'm sure they are, I'll be glad to meet Abu Nidal on equal terms anywhere in the world. Okay? There's an even deal for him. But I am not willing to have my wife and my 4 children meet Abu Nidal or his organization on his terms. And I want you to know what was going through my mind. I was about to leave for Tehran. I had already been told by Director Casey that I should be prepared to take my own life. I had already been told that the government of the United States, on an earlier proposal for a trip, might even disavow the fact that I had gone on the trip on an earlier proposal, and we can come back to that at some time if you like. And so having asked for some type of U.S. government protection for my wife and children, and having been denied that, and perhaps for fully legitimate reasons, and if there is a law that prevents the protection of American government employees and their families from people like Abu Nidal, then gentlemen, please fix it. Because this kid won't be around much longer, as I'm sure you know. But there will be others, if they take activist steps to address the problem of terrorism, who will be threatened. And I would like to just, if I may, just read to you a little bit about Mr. Abu Nidal. just so you know my mental state at the time. Abu Nidal, the radical Palestinian guerrilla leader linked to last Friday's attacks in Rome and Vienna, and that was the so-called Christmas massacre, in which 19 people died and 200 were wounded, is the world's most wanted terrorist. That's the Christian Science Monitor. When you look at his whole career, Abu Nidal makes the infamous terrorist Carlos look like a Boy Scout. Abu Nidal himself quoted in Der Spiegel, "Between America and us, there exists a war to the death. In the coming months and years, Americans will be thinking about us." For sheer viciousness, Abu Nidal has few rivals in the underworld of terrorism. Newsweek. Our own State Department, and we have copies of these that we can make available for insertion in the record, but the State Department's summary on Abu Nidal, not exactly an overstatement, notes that his followers, who number an estimated 500, have killed as many as 181 persons and wounded more than 200 in 2 years. Abu Nidal does not deny these things. We also have an exhibit that we can provide for you that shows what Abu Nidal did in the Christmas massacres. One of the people killed in the Christmas massacre, and I do not wish to over-dramatize this, but the Abu Nidal terrorist in Rome who blasted the 11-year-old American Natasha Simpson to her knees, deliberately zeroed in and fired an extra burst at her head, just in case. Gentlemen, I have an 11-year-old daughter. Not perhaps a whole lot different than Natasha Simpson. And so, when Mr. Robinette told me on or about the 10th of May that he could immediately install a security system, I said, please try to keep it to the 8,000 to 8,500. I am, after all, a Marine Lieutenant Colonel, and I live on my salary. And he installed that system. And now let me go to your next question, because I know it's coming and it deserves an answer. I never got a bill. And it is, after all, the answer to your question. It is the answer to your question. You asked me where it came from, and I'm trying to tell you.
I am going to ask you that question, but
you've already asked me the question. You asked me whether or not the money came from General Secord.
Correct.
I'm getting there.
All right, okay.
Okay. When that system was installed, it was totally complete. It allowed, for example, that when my wife would trigger an alarm, an alarm would ring in the central station, and the Fairfax police would immediately be notified. And that arrangement was worked out. This wasn't surreptitious. The Fairfax police came out. You pay your taxes in Fairfax County, but you get your money's worth. And by golly, they came out and they photographed the house and they did the normal precautionary things to respond to the kind of terrorist alert that they had been briefed on by the FBI. And that's the best that they could do, and it was, at that point, with that security system installed, it was adequate that instantly they would respond to one of those emergency alarms. And Mr. Robinette provided it. Now, I then went on the trip to Tehran. I came back. I never got a bill. I didn't ask for a bill, and I never received one. I never asked, where's the bill, until well after it was too late, and I'll cover that. When I didn't get a bill, I basically understood what had happened. And I don't know exactly how it worked out, but I believe that an accommodation was worked between Mr. Robinette and General Secord to make a gift out of that security system that I did not pay for. When I came to the end of my tenure at the NSC, it was, to say the least, a busy time. There were other things to be done besides shredding documents when I left. There was a lot of work to be done, and one of the things that I did was to sit and contemplate the previous 5.5 years of my work. And I am proud of that work. I believe that we accomplished a lot. But there was one thing that just didn't look right. And that was that for the first time in my life, I had accepted something that I hadn't paid for. And even though I honestly believe that the government of the United States should have paid for it, should have put it in. I then picked up the phone and asked for a bill. I got a bill. In fact, I got two of them. I didn't ask that they be backdated, but after all, Mr. Robinette is an old hand in the CIA. All right, the bills came with the old original dates, and I think there was another bill with a later date on it. And then, as I told you yesterday, I was going to tell you the truth, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Well, this is the truth. I did probably the grossest misjudgment that I've made in my life. I then tried to paper over that whole thing by sending two phony documents back to Mr. Robinette. It was not an exercise in good judgment. I don't believe I have any particular monopoly on bad judgment. I think it was a gross error in judgment for this committee to put my home address up on the screen for the whole world to see when I've got 20 security agents guarding my wife, my children, and me right now. I'd also like to point out that it's not quite as bad as it originally seemed. This year, and these things kind of come in Aprils, I guess, but this April, the FBI called again. This April, the FBI called and told me that there was another threat on my life. The big difference was, this year, I was back with a band of brothers that has a long reputation for taking care of its own. And the United States Marine Corps and the Naval Investigative Service of Naval Intelligence got together and immediately put security on me and my home, where my wife and children are protected. I can't tell you how grateful I am for that. The security system that was installed by Mr. Robinette with General Secord's money, or the Enterprise's money, or Mr. Hakim's money, or I don't know whose money, was put in and supplemented enormously by the folks, some of which are sitting in this room right now, some of whom are at my home right now, some of whom drive me around in an armored motorcade that makes it look like a European potentate. But the fact is, I am grateful for that assistance beyond measure, because when you think about what could happen when somebody like that is out to kill you and doesn't care if he takes out your children with you, you run out of options in a big hurry. I ran out of options. I think the government of the United States should have stepped up to it and didn't. Whether it's because of laws or regulations, I don't know. I admit to making a serious, serious judgment error in what I then did to paper it over. And I'm willing to sit here and admit to that. But I'm also suggesting to you, gentlemen, that if it was General Secord who paid the bill, whatever it was, I thought it was $8,000. Didn't learn until the hearing started it was more. I also suggest to you that if it was General Secord, first of all, thank you, General Secord, and second of all, you guys ought to write him a check because the government should have done it to begin with. Thank you, sir.